Hi, everyone. Welcome to. Oop. Hi, everyone. Now we're live for real. Welcome to Food Talk Live. I'm your host, Danny Nierenberg. A reminder that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Our guest today is someone I deeply, deeply admire because of her commitment not only to sort of the art of investigative journalism, but to telling really uncomfortable stories about corruption in our food and agriculture systems and the dangers that farmers and eaters really face from our industrial food system every day. Carey Gillam has more than 30 years of experience covering food and agricultural policies and practices. Her book, The Monsanto Papers, you can see it right here, Deadly Secrets, Corporation Corruption, and One Man's Search for Justice, uncovers corporate corruption and the dangers of Roundup, Monsanto's primary herbicide. And she files Lee Johnson's landmark lawsuit against the company, again, Monsanto. She has won several prestigious awards for her work and has been recognized as a leading global expert in the agricultural chemical industry. Her book, Whitewash, The Story of a Weed Killer, Cancer, and the Corruption of Science, was released in 2017 and won the Rachel Carson Book Award from the Society of Environmental Journalists, as well as 2 other literary awards. She has served as a consultant and participated in several documentary and TV film pieces, including the award-winning Poisoning Paradise documentary released in June of 2019, which seems like a million years ago, by actor Pierce Brosnan and his wife, Kelly Brosnan. She currently works as a reporter and data researcher for the public health research group U.S. Right to Know. Welcome, Carey. I'm so glad you're here. I can't believe we haven't had the chance to meet in person. I hope that happens soon. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is great. I appreciate you inviting me on.
Thank you. So tell me, I want to give you a chance to really talk about this book and the relationship that you have with Mr. Johnson and how this all sort of came about.
Lee Johnson is a really special person to me. I did not know him before I started working on the book, but I was fascinated by his story. Anyone who knows me or knows my first book, I guess, knows I've been covering the agrochemical industry and covering Monsanto and other players in that industry since 1998, a really long time. And my first book was really more of a heavy science book. A lot of academics responded well to it. It's been used in university lectures and that sort of thing. But this second book and the story of Lee Johnson was really personal. It felt personal to me, and I wanted it to be personal and to resonate with everyone else. I guess it's a story of a man who worked really hard during his life and really wanted to provide well for his family and his 2 little boys. He had a hard upbringing. He struggled to really, get on his feet and develop a solid income. And then he was struck by this really horrible cancer and told he had just, 18 months left to live. And so the book is really a journey with him as he has this accident in which he's doused in this chemical and eventually learns that he has cancer and then is told he has very little time left to live, and how he deals with that and how he also tries to hold this giant company, Monsanto, accountable, and sort of a journey through the legal system. So, I call him a friend. I think he calls me a friend now. I have profound respect and regard for him, and he has outlived his terminal diagnosis so far. So I hope people who do read the book will appreciate, just Lee as representative of what a lot of people who have cancer go through. Far too many people are struggling with this disease or have lost their lives to this disease. And I wanted to honor those people as well with this book to show the bravery and the courage that it takes to fight this disease.
I mean, that's what struck me throughout a lot, because I've known folks who've, battled cancer. I've known farmers who've battled cancer. And what strikes me about Lee Mr. Johnson is that he's still, it's still a big battle for him. He's taken on these two huge battles during his lifetime. One against, Monsanto, which when just hearing the Monsanto name provokes a lot of emotion in people, both, for those who, think the company's doing or thought the company was doing great things, and for those of us who didn't. And just the idea that he, cancer is a big enough battle on its own, but then to battle this agricultural giant is amazing to me.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a part in the book. I really try to write it. I try to write it sort of like fiction, like a narrative, like a story. So you're in the room with these people as the events happen. And there's a part in the book where you're with Lee and his lawyer as he's in a deposition, where he's being deposed by Monsanto's lawyers. And he had just undergone chemotherapy a couple of days before and had actually been so sick he couldn't make it to the first day of depositions. He just was so sick from his chemotherapy. And you see him just really struggling to go through this second day of depositions. And the Monsanto lawyers are quizzing him and, why didn't you show up? And why didn't you postpone your chemotherapy so that you could make it to your deposition? And Lee really, my battle against cancer is so much more important, but being in that room and being able to see and follow him through that struggle as he takes these two challenges on, it was pretty compelling for me, and I hope it is for readers too.
Absolutely. And it's kind of unusual for, a journalist to get so close to someone, who she's writing about. And I wonder, like, how you built that trust with Mr. Johnson, and how that sort of relationship, you call him a friend now, he calls you a friend, how that relationship sort of developed.
It just, it started with me really just begging for access. I mean, wanting to be able to sit down with him and to interview him, years ago now is when I started this and knew I wanted to write a book about his case. And I'd seen him, of course, but in covering the trials, but I hadn't met him in person. And it took a while for me to get access granted. And then when I met him, boy, he's a person who puts up a lot of walls, and it's really hard, in my experience, to get through those walls initially. But, over a lot of time and conversations and, visits and that sort of thing, I think he developed a trust for me. It's part of being a journalist, it's, sure. You want to get people to talk to you who maybe don't want to talk to you. That's part of the job. And
absolutely.
So, but I was going to say, I think a big part of it, what I've always felt is, you're showing respect when you want somebody's time and you want them to share their life, their stories, the events that have happened to them, their feelings. You have to really show a profound respect and consideration for that person, for their time and the truth that they're sharing with you. And I think that goes a long way towards building trust.
Absolutely. And he's someone who never expected to be in this position where he's become sort of the not poster child, but, the sort of leader of this movement against, a huge, corporate entity. And I think, it kind of reminds me what happened with Percy Schmeiser in the early 2000s when he, tried to sue Monsanto, and, he became the face of all this big battle as well. And, I think Percy, who sadly passed away last year, was probably more sort of accepted that role more easily than I think Mr. Johnson may have.
Yeah, I mean, Lee certainly, he had an upbringing, grew up without his father really in his life, and even without his mother for a good period. Was raised by a grandma, kind of a low income, struggling family for a lot of years. Wasn't able to finish school. Got in trouble with the law a little bit, just really kind of bounced around trying to find his place in the world. And he really had felt that he was there, in his 30s and 40s. He had this great job. He loved his job as a school groundskeeper. Where he was responsible for everything from trapping rodents, to repairing things that might be broken around a school, and trying to kill weeds, using these glyphosate-based weed killers in very large swaths of property around school buildings for the Benicia School District. And he made a decent income, and they were settled into a nice house, and he had his two little boys, and he was bound and determined to be a good father and raise them right. And so that when he had his accident, became doused in this weed killer, and then developed this cancer, and was told he wouldn't be there to raise his boys. I mean, that was just such a crushing blow to him. And then to see him journey to become internationally recognized through the trial and his victory against Monsanto. And he has, even in his sickness, now he has tried to travel a little bit if possible and speak out. And he now advocates for a ban on pesticides around schools. He doesn't think they should be sprayed anywhere kids are playing, or, so he has become more welcoming of that spotlight, but it certainly is not anything he ever sought.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears a little bit because, again, Monsanto provokes a lot of different feelings in people. And I wonder, how Bayer Monsanto has reacted to, the investigation, your book, you in general. I remember I've sat down with the former chief scientist of Monsanto, Rob Farley, a couple of times. And he has a big personality and a lot to say. So I imagine you've gotten some feedback.
Yeah, I adored Rob Fraley. In my first book, Whitewash, I did a shout out to Rob Fraley and Brett Begeman, who became the president, came up through the company. I mean, I spent a lot of time at Monsanto over the years. I was working for Reuters, an international news agency, and what I wrote, went to millions of readers around the world in multiple languages. And Monsanto really wanted to teach me how to write about their industry and to, make sure that I understood their strategies and their products and their practices in, of course, the light that was most favorable to them. But I did learn a lot, and they were very gracious with their time and showing me, through, their corn chipper and in experimental field trials of things, different things they were working on. So, I don't really have animosity for the individuals in the company. Certainly what I came to experience as I learned more and became more, I guess, experienced, or had really good sources with farmers and academics and scientists, and became, sort of an expert, I guess, in this industry over time. I learned that a lot of what they were saying wasn't necessarily true, and the science that they were pushing a lot of times was science that they had engineered or ghostwritten or, manipulated in some way. And so I thought it was important to expose those deceptions. And because they had pushed this glyphosate weed killer to be so widely used, the most widely used herbicide on the planet, glyphosate, it affects people all over the world. It's in the food we eat, the air, the water. Livestock consume this, and there's residues of this, in meat and dairy expected. So, it's important to understand not only, the rewards that farmers have reaped and that Monsanto has touted, but also the very real risks that come with this product and with this widespread use, the risk to human health and environmental health. And that's what I've tried to do, is lay out the risks to provide a balance for public policy matters and, just consumer choices and that sort of thing.
Well, and it's not just Monsanto that I feel has been deceptive, and you write about it in your book that EPA had known since 1985 that there were some cancer concerns about Monsanto. But, Monsanto and others told the public exactly the opposite. And so it's kind of, you uncovered widespread deception. It's not just a company, it's those who are working for our government agencies as well.
Oh my gosh. When you go back through the history of the EPA and its handling time and time again of, scientific concerns about different chemicals or different substances, there are so many examples of the EPA ultimately weighing in favor of the company and in favor of protection of the corporate profits to the detriment of public health. You're right. I mean, I've described Monsanto and its glyphosate chemical as really a poster child for this much bigger problem of pesticide companies, chemical companies that are not being held to account, that are not having the risks adequately identified and communicated and regulated by the agencies that are supposed to do that. And I think it's a function of a lot of different factors. One of them being, the money that we allow to flow into and through Washington, D.C. and our lawmakers, and the impacts on political appointees, and the revolving doors between industry and regulation. And, there are so many factors, but it's undeniable when you look at the record and you go through the EPA archives and you see their own records and you file Freedom of Information Act requests, and the documents lay it out very clearly. It's not an anecdote, it's not an opinion, it's demonstrated fact that there is a very long history of agency collusion with industry and a reluctance to regulate in a way that is what we need for protection of public health.
Absolutely. And you're right. It speaks to a much bigger issue of money and politics and sort of the revolving door that happens in our government agencies and big companies. I'm wondering, sort of, as you were looking through all those papers, which must be such a massive task. I can't even imagine it. But what surprised you the most as you were, kept uncovering things? I imagine every day it was sort of like, you wanted to scream.
People ask me that all the time, and I got to come up with a great answer because I don't know. I mean, when I wrote my first book, Whitewash, I remember just
Sure.
jaw-dropping things. I'd been writing about these issues for so long, but when I put them all together in my first book, Whitewash, I was like, wow, this is really bad. And this, so I've become sort of, I guess, hardened to it all. I would say there's a story, there's something that came out. There are many stories like this, but there's one that just sticks with me because of the hypocrisy of it. When Monsanto's and their scientists were working to come up with a scientific paper in the late 1990s, they wanted to contradict or refute a lot of independent science that was coming out showing genotoxicity concerns with glyphosate herbicides, and they needed a really strong paper published in the scientific literature to just rebut all of that. And so they set about doing that. And of course, they didn't want to have any Monsanto authors on the paper because it would look biased. They wanted it to look independent. And so they engaged in what they referred to as ghostwriting of this massive paper. And when it was published, it said no cancer concerns with this, no reproductive concerns, no nothing. This stuff is the best thing ever, and they gave it to regulators around the world. And you see them talk internally about how this is going to be their defense for glyphosate around the world. It's going to be such an important independent paper. And you see them talking internally to each other about how much time they've all spent working on this paper. And it's been years invested in this paper, and they're going to all have a little celebration, and they're going to have polo shirts printed up and, that sort of thing. And to me, it's just such a hypocrisy. It's like they've lost the compass, that says, how can you celebrate an independent paper that you ghost wrote,
right,
and not see that?
Yeah, you're right. The hypocrisy, and I think, losing their compass is sure one thing that they did. But I think what you uncovered with that is that goes on a lot more than a lot of us know, this ghostwriting. And it wasn't just with Monsanto, it's with many of these big agricultural giants.
Exactly. And that wasn't the only example of even Monsanto. There were multiple examples where they talk about ghostwriting papers and with GMOs and with glyphosate, and ghostwriting not only scientific papers, but ghostwriting articles to be published in newspapers and magazines and on websites, and paying money and establishing front groups or organizations that could go out and look like they're independent of the company and talk about how safe this chemical is and how people like Carey Gillam are crazy and wrong. I mean, it was a massive global effort to deceive, and they spent millions of dollars on this. There was a paper that came out, an internal paper that came out, and then a deposition of one of Monsanto's in-house lawyers talking about, it was like $16 million that they budgeted one year for this sort of disinformation campaign.
Wow.
And the judge in the case is like, if you had spent those millions on more studies of your chemical, on more protective measures for the public, instead of on all of these deceptive tactics designed to, it wasn't only the ghostwriting, it was setting up organizations to smear scientists, independent scientists, to try to invalidate their work, to try to work with regulators, to try to lobby the State Department to influence other countries not to ban glyphosate when they wanted to do that. It's been a huge strategy around the world for a lot of years, and the playbook really is one that was introduced by the tobacco industry.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, it just reminds me so much of that. And I think, in so many ways, these disinformation campaigns that really have prevented so much progress from being made. And so my question is, sort of what you alluded to before, why keep selling something that is not safe when you have the tools, you have the money to actually make a herbicide that is safer, or make another kind of chemical that is safer, that doesn't have all of these problems? Why keep going along this, for decades, this route?
Well, for Monsanto, with Roundup and glyphosate, the patent that Monsanto held was expiring, right? And that's when they introduced genetically engineered crops that were designed to tolerate glyphosate or be sprayed directly with it. So they had this nifty package now of Roundup Ready seeds, and you could spray those with Roundup. And they thought, and they discussed internally, how this would help them compete against generics because the patent was expiring. And so it was a real strategic move to introduce these GMOs that were binded so tightly with Roundup. And, I guess the answer to your question is why not? Because you're making a lot of money. I mean, Monsanto made billions of dollars every year off of not only its glyphosate herbicides, but the seeds that were designed to be used in conjunction with glyphosate. And then they marketed the traits as well and licensed the traits to other companies. So, money, that's what you see time and time again. You've seen it with Syngenta and Paraquat, and you've seen it with Dow and chlorpyrifos. And, when you're making a lot of money and you've got something out there that's established in the marketplace, there's really very little incentive to change it.
Absolutely. Also, what strikes me is, and you mentioned it, is the intimidation that was going on, whether, it's lawyers and with Mr. Johnson, or it's, how they were intimidating scientists. I mean, these are things that, I feel like the public, until they've read your books, they don't know that this is going on sort of behind the scenes. So when they go to their local, hardware store or Home Depot and buy these products, they don't understand the full story behind it.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, it's out of a spy novel, right? Or some of the things that they've done. And again, though, it's emblematic or illustrative of, what companies do around the world. But, there was a scientist, an international scientist who is no longer alive, but, he had discovered some very, worrisome information about glyphosate and had published that. And he was, harassed mercilessly. He was attacked physically. He had his funding threatened. There's another scientist, a French scientist, whose reputation was so sullied. I remember at Reuters, I wrote about one of his first studies that came out about glyphosate Roundup products and showing the concern with them. And then after Monsanto just tore him to shreds, Reuters didn't want me to write about him ever again, or any of his follow-up studies, because his reputation was so questionable now. Yeah. And that was exactly what Monsanto had set out to do. And we see in their internal documents that they had a strategic plan to discredit this particular scientist, and they set that in motion. They did the same thing with the International Agency for Research on Cancer. The scientists who work for that agency, which is part of the World Health Organization, you see in their internal documents, they expected this group of international scientists were going to classify this chemical glyphosate as a probable human carcinogen. And so they set about, before the group even met, laying out a plan to discredit and orchestrate outcry, is what they called it,
Sure.
with this group. And then they set that in motion. And, it's all based on using third parties who look like they're independent of Monsanto to really make the hard push.
I spent a lot of time, thinking about corporations and trying to remind myself that they're made up of people, and, these people aren't evil, but this strikes me as so devious and so underhanded that it makes me question, how I try to sort of relate to food and agriculture companies.
Yeah, I know. It's hard, isn't it, to separate. The judge, one of the judges in this case, just yesterday there was a hearing, and he again spoke of Monsanto, the evidence that showed Monsanto's conduct, and how egregious it was in being deceptive. Other judges have called them out as well after they look at the evidence. I don't know why companies engage in this behavior that, when you look at it and you boil it down, it seems criminal, right? I mean, it's deceptive. It's dangerous for people. You look at DuPont, and if you know Rob Bilott and the story of DuPont and the poisoning of the water, that was in West Virginia, and how long they did this and knew about it, knew they were poisoning people and hid it. People were getting cancer and dying, and their livestock was dying, and it was a terrible thing. But still, they did everything they could to, keep that going. And, you see that over and over. Chlorpyrifos right now. I mean, we still have, chlorpyrifos. Maybe we're turning people off talking about all these nerdy things.
No.
Chlorpyrifos is known to be so damaging to children's brains. It's been banned for household use since the year 2000. Numerous courts have told the EPA they've got to act. The EPA's own scientists have said there's no amount of this that's safe in food and water. This, it's a scientific consensus how dangerous it is for children. But it's still allowed in farming, still allowed in agriculture. So, the EPA is facing yet another court order now to take action and do something about it. But it's ridiculous that this is on the market still.
Right. It's so slow that, and it baffles me that so many people are involved, that so many people are keeping this secret, or, trying to for so long, or acting like nothing's wrong. And I guess that sort of leads me to my next question, which is, there are fewer and fewer journalists like Carey Gillam who are digging into, over years, digging into these issues, who are working for Reuters or, big newspapers or other, magazines. There are just fewer and opportunities for journalists to dig into stories like this. And that really bothers me, and I think so many of us, because there are a lot of secrets that need to be uncovered, whether we're talking about food and agriculture or big pharma or any of these corporations who are not being held accountable. And I wonder what your thoughts are, because you've gone from being a journalist with this kind of beat and your area of expertise to more advocacy, and I think for good reason. But, the state of journalism around food and agriculture issues is sort of dwindling in terms of this investigative work.
Yeah. There are a lot of factors, I think, that affect media. The industry now of media, it's all about clicks and, big headlines, and a lot of the news outlets believe, and maybe rightly so, I don't know, that readers aren't going to stay with the story very long, so everything's got to be really short and snippy and concise, and they don't think readers want to dig deeply into an issue. And that there's, if you're going to investigate a story and spend a lot of time on it, but you're only going to get a very short amount of space to tell that story, you really lose that incentive. I don't know. I think it's rare for a reporter to be on the same beat as long as I was. For more than 20 years, write about the same thing. Most reporters want to sort of move up and on and do different things. But it is, we all eat. There's probably nothing that's more directly impactful on our health, on all of us and our health, than the food that we consume, and on the planet, than agriculture, the impacts on water and air and soil health and climate change. And it's profoundly important that we really understand these practices and these policies and these impacts, and that we have policies that are driven for the best for all of us, so that we can have a longer and healthier future than what we're looking at right now. And journalism should be part of that. And advocacy, I still bristle at that word, when you say that, because I'm not somebody who goes out and says ban this or don't ban that or do this. I'm somebody who says look at the science, look at the evidence, look at the documents, look at the data, and then make an informed and balanced decision, whether you're a regulator, or a lawmaker or a consumer.
Wow.
I think it's important to be as educated and informed as we can and make the decisions that we think are best for ourselves, our families, our children, and our children and our future. And there's so many powerful forces trying to work against that transparency. So you need journalists. That's our job. We advocate for transparency. We advocate for the truth. And it's getting harder and harder, it seems like.
It is. I want to shift a little bit before we go. And, earlier this year, Mexico ruled that the country would phase out the use of glyphosate. And I'm wondering, that seems like such a promising sign. And I'm wondering if you're hopeful that other governments will begin, paying more attention, for one, and acting upon what their scientists at their agencies recommend them to do. And do you think that will impact not just glyphosate, but, other agrochemicals that are dangerous, that we've been talking about before, that, will things change governmentally?
Well, you are seeing, it's hard to know because it's sort of a push-pull, and a one step forward, two steps back. But, Thailand, I've written about both Thailand and the Mexico situation. Right. Thailand a couple of years ago said, yeah, we're going to ban glyphosate and chlorpyrifos, and what was the third one? Dicamba, maybe? I can't remember now.
Yeah.
And, Monsanto jumped up and said, heck no, you're not. And they jumped on the U.S. government to apply pressure to Thailand, and Thailand backed away from its ban on glyphosate. Mexico, same thing. Mexico says, we're going to ban glyphosate. Monsanto says, no, we don't want that to happen. They involve the State Department and the USDA and apply a lot of pressure and threaten trade retaliation and that sort of thing. Mexico so far has been holding to its guns and saying, we're going to ban glyphosate. But the end of the story has yet to play out, and the U.S. is putting a lot of pressure on that country over this. So we'll see.
Hey, there's a lot to take in. I want to give you a chance to tell people where to get this amazing book, The Monsanto Papers.
Anywhere books are sold, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, independent booksellers. You can go directly to the publisher, Island Press. You can find links on my website, careygillam.com. I do hope people, won't be turned off by a pesticide. This is really the story of a man and
Sure.
Cancer and a family and a really interesting legal case that has a lot of twists and turns that, who would have thought that this lead attorney would, suffer. I'm giving too much away. This near fatal accident just on the eve of trial that just sort of changed everything.
There is a movie in here, Carey. This is a movie.
Exactly. When I was watching all this unfold, that's what I kept thinking. This is a movie. This is crazy stuff that's happening. So I don't know how to make a movie, but I know how to write a book. So
yeah, and again, it's such a great narrative. I recommend everyone who's listening read it. Again, go to careygillam.com for more information. Thank you so much, Carey. So great to have you on the show finally. This is something I've been wanting for a long time, so I really appreciate your time. A reminder to folks that they can join me back here again on Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, when I'll be talking to Martin Wolf from the company's 7th generation. Thank you again, Carey. Please stay safe and well.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me.